Hi, Michelle. Welcome. I just wanted to have you do a mic check if you could. So hit the talk button and make sure that we can all hear you and that you can advance your slides through the Page Explorer. Thank you so much.
Hello.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, sorry I'm late. It's one of those days.
Not a problem at all. We'll get started in about 8 minutes. So thanks everyone for joining. And like I said, we'll get started in about 8 minutes. If you want to type in the chat room and introduce yourself, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
I just put the link to an upcoming blog post about this webinar. It's going to be posted later today, and it's about some of the things I think our leaders will be talking about. So anyone is welcome to read that while they're waiting.
Welcome to the conference entry code you entered is invalid. Please try again. Please be patient. An operator will be with you.
Just do one more test to make sure all is working from my side. It's Jeff.
Sounds great, Jeff. Thanks so much. That you are sharing our mission and ensuring that all learners have access to a world-class education. While people are introducing themselves, please feel free to use the chat window docked on the lower left. We'll be monitoring questions and comments throughout the presentation, as well as using that for question and answers after the panelist overviews. We have a full deck today, so hopefully you'll walk away with an overview from leaders who are sharing their stories at different districts, schools, and programs. We'll learn about how each defines blended learning for their particular context, why each decided on blended learning models, and the barriers to and advice about implementing blended learning. We'll also have a good chunk of time for Q&A, so please, again, use the chat room for questions, comments, and anything you'd like to share. We are tweeting at #VLRoadmap, as well as at iNACOL and at iNACOL members. So again, we're excited to welcome this panelist of educational leaders. To introduce the panel, I'd like to introduce Verena Roberts, who is an iNACOL consultant with our new learning model team, and she is in Calgary, Canada. So Verena, take it away.
Thank you, Maya. I am so excited to be here today with some amazing guests from across North America. I have had the privilege of working with all of these guests in creating the updates for the profiles for the Blended Learning Roadmap. I am not going to waste any more time on myself, and what I am going to ask is that each of our panelists please introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their district or school or program. It will take about 5 minutes for each person, and I do encourage you to add your questions in the box, and as we said, if we don't get to them, we'll get to them at the end. Okay, so if we could start at the top. So Jeff Stewart from Canada, can you start for us and introduce yourself and your, oh, pardon me, we are starting with Edie Cox. Sorry, I wasn't checking my PowerPoint properly. Edie, we're going to start with Edie. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me this afternoon. I'm from Horry County Schools, which is a district in South Carolina. I think you can see from the slide deck, we have one middle school called Whittemore Parton Middle School, who actually was our pilot school to start and launch a large blended learning initiative in the district 3 years ago. Horry County Schools is a district of about 52 schools. We have 42,000 students. We're the third largest district in the state, and 65% economically disadvantaged. So our district is on one end very rural and has a large number of students in schools who are disadvantaged, and yet on the other side of the county is along the Grand Strand of Myrtle Beach, which is a whole different learning environment for our students. Briefly, our Blended Learning Initiative started back in 2013. Our district wanted to provide devices to all of our students, and we knew that just putting a device in the hands of kids was not going to be the silver bullet to help with student achievement. So we were interested in an instructional model to support the availability of all of the digital tools and content. And blended learning seemed to be, and we studied, and it seemed to be a great option for our teachers and classrooms to move them to the next level. You can see from the slide, I think there's a quote there, and actually one of my colleagues used this a couple of years ago in a presentation. Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore. I think that's something we tell teachers every day is it's a new day. Kids don't learn the way we do in classes. And we've got to start treating them differently and meeting them where they are. And I think the digital tools we have available now can help us get there.
Thank you, Edie. I just want to make sure I didn't interrupt you. Edie, are you finished?
Yeah, I didn't know how much time, if you wanted me to go through the whole story, or if you had posing questions you wanted to ask.
Yeah, why don't you go through a bit of your story now, and then we'll go through the questions afterwards as well. Just checking. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So the slide you're seeing on your screen actually is the rollout, what we did to implement blended learning in a district. We started actually at the middle school level. People ask, well, why did you start at middle schools? And we say, well, really it had everything to do with convenience from the district level and probably nothing to do with whether it was the right thing instructionally at the time. We just knew that we had a smaller number of middle schools. So I think in giving advice to other districts, I would say that's one thing we may do differently if we had to do it all over again. By starting in the middle schools, we then launched up to high schools in year 2, and this year are backing up and picked up 5th grade in our elementary. So this slide kind of gives you a graphic glimpse of what that rollout looked like. The instructional model we've worked with classrooms on is most of our schools have selected a rotation model. We know that there are various definitions of blended learning across the country, but I think our definition of blended learning and what we tend to try to hold teachers to and actually include in all of our professional development is we define blended learning as where students have daily opportunities for individualized instruction and teachers have the opportunities, resources, and time to differentiate in small groups. So our focus this year is really on small group instruction. We've tried to move away from conversations about rotations and the model and feel like if we concentrate on how to pull small groups, how to use data, how do teachers use the wide variety of data they have available to actually pull kids and work with them on what they need, that will almost force the other groups, the collaborative groups, and some of those other pieces of a blended learning model. So that's really our definition is a strong focus on individualized learning through small group instruction. This next slide is a slide that kind of shows why we launched blended learning. We feel like we've had in our district had a very, very strong core curriculum, and that our core curriculum does a great job meeting those students who kind of fall in the middle or are slightly below or slightly above grade level. But we felt like we needed some digital content that would really help provide some strategic intervention for those students who were falling on the outer edges of this diamond. And I know it takes a little while to look at this diamond and realize what it's illustrating, but what that digital content has allowed us to do in the blended classroom is reach those kids on the ends, either on the far end to the left or the upper end to the right, and give them that individualized instruction they need that most of the time teachers in our classrooms are unable to do because they have so many students. So this was really why we launched the blended learning model initially, was that we felt that our teachers, because of some prior experiences, really had begun to trust digital content and trust what it could do to move kids, and that we could really take advantage of that by helping to provide those resources district-wide. And then if I would say, you know, what advice moving forward, if we could give advice to anyone else, I think we've learned on this journey that blended learning is not a silver bullet. It's not going to happen overnight. And that is really a marathon, that we've got really great pockets of innovation and teachers doing great things in pockets across the district. And we're looking for ways now to share those successes and use those classrooms as models for other teachers within the district to visit, so that we can really spread that knowledge in a consistent fashion. So I think that's probably one of our biggest struggles, is as a district trying to be patient and knowing that teachers have their plates full. It's not going to happen overnight. You can roll out technology overnight, but the instructional pieces that go with that are going to take time. But we're really excited about where we are. Our teachers are doing great things, but we know it's going to be a journey. So we try to keep telling teachers to keep on sprinting. This is a marathon, and we're going to get there. So that's really just a glimpse, a snapshot of where we are and what Horry County Schools has done with blended learning recently.
Thank you so much, Edie. And we have a couple of questions, but they're questions that I think all of our expert leaders could answer. So if it's okay, I'm just going to wait until everyone does an overview, and then we'll get into these great questions. Okay? So Kevin, I'd like to introduce Kevin. Are we ready, Kevin?
I think I'm ready. How does it sound?
Perfect. Thanks.
All right. Hi, I'm Kevin Krogan. I'm the site director for blended learning and environments over at Denver Public Schools. I work at Grant Beacon Middle School, which is it's kind of a smaller middle school. So we have in DPS we have 190 schools currently. It is an urban setting. For those of you who have not been to Colorado, we are not actually in the mountains, so but we are just right on the edge. One other thing I would mention is at our school we have about 460 students. I think as far as our path and what got us to blending is about 5 years ago. We were not getting the gains that we were hoping to have in our school. So the reality is we were getting pretty good student growth, but we were not getting student achievement scores. So instead of student having, we had a lot of students that were moving from unsatisfactory to partially proficient, even higher. We did not have enough students that were in like this proficient to advanced range. So our school was actually kind of in threat of being closed down. And so we as a staff met, and I think this is part of my recommendations too. I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of a school who wanted to do the initiative on their own. So different from Edie, who was talking from a district perspective. or district level, we decided we wanted to save our school. We thought we could offer really great instruction, but we wanted to, as a team, decide what would be our path. And so we did a lot of work how do I put it? We did a lot of work in like empathy research and stuff like that, working with community members, working with students, working with parents, all of these folks, and kind of landed on we wanted to try blended learning. So I'm going to zip through some of the slides. That's our official fancy logo, but I'm going to skip that one. What we did about 4 years ago is we came up with this plan for how we wanted our school to move forward. And so we built it on 3 pillars, one of them being blended learning, the other was through extended learning opportunities and offering community-based enrichments, and a third one was on character development, and so actually trying to define what is character and then having a common nomenclature about how do we speak about student character. But more to the point and more the reason why I'm here today, we wanted to be doing blended learning. So at the time, we did not have the funding, nor did we have all of the support that we needed in order to go full one-to-one. But I think a key thing that we did is we came up with a 5-year vision of what we wanted our school to look like, and we knew that we wanted to get to one-to-one. So we didn't, and I guess Edie said it was a marathon, and I totally agree. We kind of approached it like the elephant, and if you know the old saying, how to eat an elephant, and it's one bite at a time, we would stop and we basically came up with our 5-year vision, but then we started giving ourselves like milestones within like what can we achieve year to year to year. And so 2 years ago, we finally got to one-to-one technology. And so our generalized definition of blended learning is it's the idea of the intentional use of technology with sound instructional pedagogy. And that's, that's basically how we want to approach it. But that wasn't even sufficient for what we were doing. So the thing that we actually came up with is we wanted to, as a school, we decided blended learning was relatively new, and we had a goal for what we wanted blended learning to do for us. And so we actually wanted blended learning to get us to this point of personalization. So we've chosen that as our path. And so the slide that you have here, we're really big on UDL and having like, icons that represent different things. And so what you have in this to the left here is you have these things, this diagram that I have here, these represent the facets of blended learning, the things that we wanted to see happen. So we started with this plan of we wanted all of our students to have unique pathways, but again, it was focused around differentiation. In order for us to get that, we knew we needed to focus on data and then use that data to inform our instruction. And then when it came down to the intentional use of technology, we knew we still wanted our students working face-to-face, but we also would have an online component. So we wanted to have, again, common language around what our model of blended learning was going to look like. And so once we had good data and once we actually had things in online spaces, we opened up our opportunities for students to learn both synchronously and asynchronously. So if you look, the way this is set up is our primary goal was to get to differentiation and pathway, but in the long range, we were ultimately hoping to get to a point where students would be able to start personalizing their learning. So we wanted students, so again, we were moving away from traditional blending where it's really about the inputs, how are students receiving content, and we wanted to move them into this point where they would actually not only be able to have more choice over how they were receiving content, but then also more voice. In addition, we wanted them to have that same kind of choice and voice when it came down to how they demonstrated mastery. So for us, and I can always talk more about this later, but these are the diagrams that we're using as we speak to our students, as we speak to parents about what our model of blending ultimately should look like. And that is my high-level overview without going into too much detail.
That's greatly appreciated, and I think that many people are going to want more detail. So thank you, Kevin. Okay, next we have Michelle.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Koper. I'm the director of KM Global, which is part of the Kettle Moraine School District. We're about 30 miles west of Milwaukee in southeastern Wisconsin. Our district is about 4,000 students. The school that I oversee is a high school, so it's grades 9 through 12. We currently have 71 students, and we are going into our 5th year. So I just want to tell you a little bit about our school, and then I'll tell you about how we got there. So we are a blended school. So we focus on developing leadership skills and global perspective through student interests in a personalized learning design. We use the Asia Society Global Competencies to guide our curriculum in developing those global perspectives, and we create leadership opportunities for students. And in developing our school, one way that we knew we would be able to get to some of those goals would be to create a blended learning environment. So we have all sorts of different opportunities for students to get to these outcomes. They do a semester-long in-depth inquiry, so we are partially a project-based school. They work on a self-directed individual inquiry for the semester. It's multidisciplinary and competency-based. We work on those leadership skills, again, out in the community, within our school. They connect with people, and that blended format allows them to do that, as well as the field experiences. So we want them to complete experiences through their inquiry, so learning outside of our walls. And then lastly, they do have blended courses, seminars, small group meetings, and face-to-face meetings. Our definition of blended learning in KM Global is that it's something that allows us to personalize student learning. So our goal as a district is to provide opportunities to personalize learning for students. And for us, using online tools in combination with face-to-face meetings allows us to individualize the content based on their own individual interests and abilities, and again, get out and learn from the community. This is similar to Kevin's slide, I think, about different ways to really personalize and achieve goals. So there's all different paths that students can take. We also rely on data and on goal setting to develop some of those personalized learning plans and goals for students. But it's really about taking their interest, their pace, and then addressing what their goals are for the future and focusing on those non-academic skills just as much as we focus on the academics. So part of the creation of this was realizing that we have a lot of really bright students in our district who were getting into colleges, and they were not as successful as we had hoped they would be. And a lot of that came back to lacking some of those leadership and critical thinking, initiative, problem-solving skills. So the blended learning design, we felt, addressed some of that and helped them develop some of those just life skills. So this was part of a directive that our school board gave about 8 years ago. They gave a directive to our superintendent to transform education in our district, which was a pretty lofty goal. But out of that, one of the things that came out of it was KM Global, and it was the goal to provide students choice and also address those 21st century skills, knowledge, and dispositions that we know that they need. We actually started out in our development phase as a pretty traditional online school, and through different focus groups, we had professional advisories, focus groups, community members, students, teachers. We never actually went forward with a completely online school, but decided that blended was going to be the right choice for our students and the goals that we had for them. My advice, lessons learned being in our 5th year of doing this, that keys to successfully implementing a blended program, flexibility is really key, having that growth mindset for the learners and the instructors. And I would add to that too, parents and community members. There's a huge learning curve involved with blended learning and just educating and being flexible on that. Having a flexible design, so a lot of the things that we planned from the beginning, when I look back, you know, they maybe didn't work, or we decided to do things a different way, and it's being okay with that and knowing that we need to evolve based on student needs. And then, like I mentioned earlier, just building an understanding with all stakeholders that really develops the support that we need from the community. Some challenges that we have come across, the infrastructure, so our broadband, we have one-to-one for our students, and one of our goals we are a charter school, and one of the goals with it is to, you know, really inform practices throughout the district. And so as people have started using more and more technology, we found we just did not have the system to support that. So our district, part of a referendum that was passed last spring, included an upgrade of our own broadband. We have also had some challenges finding relevant professional development because we do have such a unique mix of project-based learning with blended learning, seminar-based learning, competency-based, that we've had to almost have like a buffet of different professional development for our teachers and just finding the right fit for what they need. And then lastly, it's really just some of the misconceptions out there about blended and online learning, that kids are teaching themselves, that they're, you know, just sitting in front of a computer all day, that they, you know, maybe aren't challenged enough from it or critically thinking enough. And we have found that it has done so much for us to allow some of that self-paced and more challenging curriculum for them to do on their own, that then gives us really great opportunities to have valuable conversations with kids face-to-face. So that blended model has really worked out well for us. Those are just some pictures throughout the year. You know, I think when people think of blended or online learning, they're always surprised to see kids out and doing things, but this is exactly what our goal is for kids to get out and learn from each other and explore things as groups. There's a lot of collaboration involved. And of course I have to brag about the fact that we were just featured in Newsweek this year as being one of the best high schools, so I had to add that.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and congratulations on being featured in Newsweek. Finally, we have Jeff Stewart. So Jeff, are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go, and thank you for having me. It's nice to put the I in iNACOL. Rena and I had a bit of a chuckle about that prior to when we were planning for the session, about having a Canadian in on this junket. So thank you for having me, and it's really exciting to be able to listen and share the stories this morning. I'm really grateful for that. I'm a district principal for distributed learning in a fairly small-sized school district in central Vancouver Island. Some might call us the North, but we're not. We service, what's unique about our school is that we service students across British Columbia. Unlike a lot of distributed learning schools in the province, we have truly a provincial scale in our school. We're one of the oldest distributed learning schools in the province. Another thing that's really important to distinguish what we do here in British Columbia from perhaps what you're used to in the United States is we have very little, if any, national presence in education. Ours is all done provincially or statewide, as you might refer to it. So there's very little direction nationally. It's all done provincially, and that sort of sets the context for this school. It serves a clientele of around 4,000 students across BC. That's head count, not FTE. It's a big operation. We're K-12 and adult, so we hold basically the educational keys for a very broad audience. So that's a little bit about the background to the school. That's our website if you want to go visit our school. There's all sorts of information posted there about our programs. Some of them I'm going to talk about in just a second. But that's our website, and gives a good overview of the kind of programs we operate here provincially in British Columbia. Why blended? What's our definition? Well, I think looking back at it now, although it certainly wasn't how we conceived it at the time overtly, it certainly was in the background of our thinking, we saw blended learning as a disruptive innovation. There was certainly a call provincially here in British Columbia, similar to what I'm hearing from the other presenters about change and transformation in the education system. It was a big thing here, starting from about 2010 onward. There was a call in the BC Education Plan, which really looked at personalization, really looked at advancing new modalities of learning, focusing less on specific outcomes and checklists of learning towards higher order thinking. We were doing really well provincially in the international studies and PISA and those things, but we still were feeling that we were plodding through a huge list of prescribed learning outcomes for students and not really advancing higher order thinking around personalization, around project-based learning and inquiry learning, and basically teaching students how to think. So when that boiled down to a district level, my superintendent said we need to do some neat, innovative things. And Jeff, you're handling this distributed learning school, and you've been a brick and mortar principal for quite some time. Come up with some neat and innovative ideas about how to do that. So we wanted to bend or break conventions and provide families here in our school district with some pretty significantly radical different models of how to advance education and learning. We focused a large part in our initial definition of these blended programs on the philosophy around the blended programs. We were invested pretty heavily in the design around the work of the Search Institute and Peter Benson, that's out of Wisconsin, and the work around sparks and students' passions. And that paralleled what Ken Robinson and others were saying around creativity globally and trying to inspire those kind of things in students. So I brought together a group of teachers and we talked. I brought together some parents. And we talked about creating some new e-academies, so online academies. And we created two in 2012. One, a Fine Arts Academy, a K-8 program. And the other one was Enter, which is the E-Academy of New Technologies, Engineering and Robotics, reflecting the passions that the students had. The typical ones that I've seen as a principal over many years, the things that really spark student interest. And of course, we all struggle to keep fine arts alive in our school, and this is a way to put it back at the center of learning. And with, the middle-aged students, middle years age students, we also knew that there was a huge demand for engineering and robotics and just tactile learning, working in programming, coding, gaming, all that kind of stuff. Kids love it, they eat it up. And when you put those things at the center of their learning and personalize it with that philosophy, you start ending up having magic. In our secondary schools, we really thought heavily about providing accessibility to online learning. Most post-secondary institutions, even businesses now, require online learning as part of their platform. If not outright, that's how you do your learning with our business or our school. And so we wanted students to graduate with some degree of exposure to online learning as part of mandatory or at least a part of their learning platform. There's also strong research here in British Columbia that suggests that when students have an online course in their graduation portfolio, their graduation rates go up fairly significantly. We wanted to give students and parents a real choice in the modality of their learning, so we created these two district programs of choice, and then instead of making them 5-day-a-week programs, we made them 3 days face-to-face with 2 days distributed learning. So the students attend these academies on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and they're at home on Monday and Friday. And they learn basically at home for 4 days a week and then face-to-face at school the other 3. So a little bit of a different model, and that sort of reflects that disruptive innovation piece that we were really looking at from the get-go. As I mentioned here, we really wanted to focus on their passions. We created a really unique calendar that allowed the whole year to start off with in-depth interviews with the students and parents to sort of really map out the students' learning plan for the year and focus on their passions. They were basically 8-week learning cycles where they focus on project-based learning, broken up by what we call the Compass Week, which allowed them to, the teachers, to be freed up from instruction to meet again with the teachers to have another hour-long interview with them around assessment and learning, and provided the students in those Compass Weeks with some unique community-based learning experiences. So they were learning not just from their teachers, but from community members in situ. So they would visit bakeries and go to capoeira training sessions, all that kind of thing during that Compass Week. The whole curriculum in these programs is focused on personalization, project-based, inquiry-based learning, going deep. The whole emphasis of the change was to get away from curriculum that was a mile wide and a centimeter deep towards some really deep learning. And so that's really what these learning cycles allowed us to do. We also focused really heavily on parent engagement in the whole educational enterprise as partners and as co-facilitators. And we've been walking down that path ever since and learning a huge amount about the power of unleashing parent accessibility, parent involvement, parent engagement in co-facilitating learning in a blended format, which is taking learning in directions we never thought possible. And it's really helping cement our programs, helping guide our programs, and really creating rich relationships between home and school. And that's a depth of a growth curve that I can't overestimate. We also went into new forms of assessment. We were really big into e-portfolios, blogs, parent dialogue, as I said. So that was another emphasis of what we were trying to achieve through blended learning. My advice, begin with a compelling vision of what you're trying to achieve, and then communicate it over and over and over again. We had, in launching these programs and every year since, a lot of community information nights, because there's a lot of questions about this model. It's not for everyone, and you need to use those community information nights to basically train your clientele to make sure that the parents that you're bringing into these kind of avant-garde programs are ready for what they face and know what the benefits and the costs are in terms of the program. So, once you've got your philosophy, once you're going, you've got to run the experiment. I'm involved with a group at the University of Michigan, the Institute for Innovation Education, and they termed it quite appropriately, run with the experiment. My experience has really been fire, get it going, try to stabilize it, keep it ready, and then aim it as you go. If anybody's seen that video of the company that builds their airplanes in flight, that's truly how this is felt. And so the biggest barriers I would suggest in launching these kind of blended learning programs is managing parent expectations. I think I've heard some of the other presenters talk about that. Communicating openly and often with the parents so they understand how this is unique and different and the real benefits to it. And of course, finding the right instructional team. That's always a challenge in education, and finding those really dynamic, engaged teachers that really want to try to bend the conventions, break the barriers of what can and can't be done in a classroom setting. So I will conclude with that.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Okay, now is the chance for your questions, and I am, they're just getting right in the chat box there. I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I would love it if the panelists could just speak up to answer the question. So the first question at the beginning was student learning preference the only motivator in adopting blended learning? And that was more to Edie. That was when you were talking about student learning preference. Edie, do you want to start with that, and then anyone else can add to it?
Sure. Actually, what started us truly thinking about blended learning is years ago the district had adopted some digital content that pulled data from MAP assessment. I don't know how many of you are familiar with NWEA's MAP assessment, but this digital content would actually create backpacks for students based on what they were ready to learn. We saw that our Title I schools who actually could use Title I funding to purchase hardware were seeing great gains in student achievement that we attributed to access to hardware as well as implementing digital content and using it with fidelity. So for several years, we've watched those struggling Title I schools who had the hardware and were using the digital content watch their test scores really go up. So that really started making us take a hard look at, what is it our other schools can do to ride that same train. They need those resources as well. So that was part of the research we did and part of the data within our own district we had to make those decisions.
Thank you, Edie. Oh, Michelle, go ahead.
I would say ours was not just based on student voice, but that was a huge component of it. But we started with what our goals were and what we wanted to achieve, and then blended learning really gave us that option rather than start with, oh, we want to do this, and now what can it do for us?
Thanks, Michelle. The next question was about professional development way back when. So maybe you could each discuss a bit about what kind of support you put in place for professional development. Oh, Edie, go ahead.
In Horry County, as part of our initiative, the board approved 6 additional positions at the district level. So we hired what we call digital integration specialists, and they actually work in schools every day trying to customize and personalize learning for teachers the way we expect teachers to personalize and customize learning for students. So those folks are working really hard to change the way we deliver professional development, offering more webinars, also trying to work with teachers in small groups rather than, pulling in 60 teachers and starting them all on the same page at the same time, trying to really treat our teachers the way we expect them to treat students. So we're trying that model to see how professional development can be more effective by trying to model what we expect teachers to do.
Kevin?
Yeah, my response would be very similar. However, I think the thing that we tried to implement and had some success with specifically was around, we wanted to give teachers personalized learning plans so they were able to set their own personalized goals for where they're at. The reality was we had teachers who were already effectively blending in the school prior to us deciding to do it as a school-wide initiative. And so we had teachers, basically set their own goals as to, I know this is totally synthetic to do it this way, but they said, well, I'm going to try it once a week for the first quarter, and then after that, with the intention that it was constantly they knew they were jumping in, but we wanted to have a more reasonable expectation because the background that some of our teachers already had in technology made it a little bit difficult for us to put everyone on the same page. And so again, we just wanted to have individual plans and allow the teachers to build from there. Other than that, we did leverage other resources for us to secure more time within the building and making sure that teachers had a lot of common planning and time. So for us, we have every single week, we actually have 2 hours every Friday morning where all teachers are in the building and able to work together or work on independent projects or that kind of thing. We also have an hour every week where teachers get to meet in grade levels in order to make sure that there's some commonality, horizontally. But then when we look at vertically, we also have teachers that are able to meet in departments. So that way, it's giving us a lot more time to problem solve and design new solutions together. Lastly, and this is something new that we implemented this year because we got to a point where the basics of understanding blended learning had to be, the teachers don't need that anymore. They want to start going down their own paths. And so we actually have created time in our schedule where we now have once every couple of months, a whole grade level will get creativity hour where the students will actually be able to go and work with a separate group of teachers to do something creative, which gives our grade level teams an opportunity to sit down and try to creatively find problems or solutions to their problems.
And Kevin, do you want to talk a bit about your like a mentorship program or how did you phrase it? The internship where you go in for a year and you follow somebody?
Sure. So as a matter of fact, from our district perspective, or from our school's perspective, we're leveraging several different programs. So in Denver, we actually do have, so there's two things that I'll speak to. In Denver, we have a program called the Denver Teacher Residency. That's a program that we do in collaboration with University of Denver. And so we actually do have one-year residents that come to the school, so that way they can learn, they could go into any school. We have 3 currently this year where they're actually learning the same thing you would do in a student teaching kind of format, but then also they get to learn the blended stuff that we're doing here as well. Beyond that, though, we as a school have decided to replicate, and so we're creating another middle school. So we took our Year Zero funding and we got an advance against our Year Zero funding for us to be able to hire our Year One teachers, with the intention that they come in and they're going to be team teaching and cooperating with the staff. But the reality is this: if we want to have a successful program, I think the things that can actually scale are going to be processes and philosophies. And so when we think about that, we want to make sure that teachers are coming in to the program, see how it works successfully, and understand, our generalized philosophy around blended learning. And then we also then try to come up and identify key processes that they'll work on. And so while they're here, we have teachers that are actually, will be and are currently trying to understand very clearly what we think this should look like, so that way they can use that to inform their lessons before they actually start Year One. I think so we're using very similar models. I mean, anyone who's seen residency models knows the general idea about how that works. So we've just kind of created our own for the school as we create a network.
Thanks, Kevin. I am seeing comments in the chat box suggesting that maybe we need to create some kind of online residency program to support learners across the continent. So all of you can think about that and possibilities. But going back to the questions, where have you seen support for your special needs students or special education students and English language learners? Can any of you speak specifically about those two groups in particular? Michelle?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to talk about that. Most IEP meetings that I'm involved in, the accommodations that are requested seem to be built right into our program. So working at their own pace, getting one-on-one help, getting different materials. We find that the biggest thing that we seek extra help for, just as more support for kids, is the managing of their task and kind of that independent factor. But we work a lot on that with them as well. I have not had any ELL students in my program, so that I cannot speak to.
Jeff, do you want to speak to that a bit, especially with maybe the robotics program example, maybe?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's the engineering robotics program. All of our programs really are fully inclusive. So we had a lot of students with apply in the initial years that had designations. A lot of students with autism, and these programs they were supported in the schools in which they were located because they were off campus from our main campus and embedded within regular elementary and secondary schools. And we provided the student services in those schools as if they were just part of the school, so they're alongside the regular brick and mortar programs. And it was always a challenge, I think, in the first year or two to get the school to accept the anomalies that our program threw at them. But the student support workers, the educational assistants, the learning support teachers all worked hand in hand eventually to really support the students in the classroom. And I think that really, the whole platform was so open-ended that it really appealed to the parents of students with special needs and the students themselves who tended to thrive in this, although a lot because the social emotional learning that went alongside of the programs was very deep. I think we came out of the boxes very quickly learning that SEL, or social emotional learning, was a core part of what we were up to, and all the special needs supports around that built out of that understanding. And so the students had a tremendous amount of success because of that. They found their own people. The students often talk, especially students with special needs, about finding their own peeps in the program, because there were students that were talking and thinking and behaving in the same ways as they always found at the heart of their own passions. So that's fundamentally how we've handled the special education side of things.
Thank you. And Kevin, you were going to say something as well?
Oh, I just wanted to chime in. I noticed Stephanie Pope was the one who had asked about the SPED impacts, and so I wanted to emphasize two things. One is that we felt that it actually has not had any diminishing need for supports. As a matter of fact, it's just multiplied the number of contact points that our special educators are able to have with our students. We actually use an inclusion model, but so oftentimes what we're able to do is because a lot of the stuff exists in this virtual space, it has made teaming between special educator and the teacher of record. It's made teaming them a little bit easier because they can do the work asynchronously. But then it also has given them much greater access. So a good example is in situations where students have to go to a resource room, they can still have access, same access to the same kind of stuff that we're using in the traditional classroom. So we've seen those things. And then I noticed, and this will be my shout out to Sarah Cleforth. I know that you're on this, and she's in my district and does work specifically with ELA. She is actually working with me currently at my school with us trying to identify the best practices that we see with second language learners in a brick and mortar classroom usually have some kind of implication that we can see in the virtual classroom. So, and ultimately when we look at schools, we talk about environment, but really in a blended school it's environments plural. And so I got to be thinking, if I'm going to offer certain supports that exist within the room, how do I actually then mirror those supports in the virtual space? And how do I constantly reference them and make them accessible? And so for us, we see great implications for, teachers who have not always been able to offer the same kind of, primary language support, now actually have the support of, digital tools and access to the internet for them to be able to create or, even just embed resources that are going to help students in their primary language. And that's the end of my talk.
Thank you, Kevin, and I will connect with you on that because iNACOL is doing an upcoming report on English language learning and personalized learning options. So that's awesome. Esther asked, what were the main factors that went into choosing your online programs to help your students? So why did you come up with the focus areas that you did? And then what were the main factors in training teachers to use the data to inform their instruction? Yeah, really specifically anything about data and evidence of learning would be great. Sorry, Edie, please tell us.
I think the question you mentioned, we talked about what digital tools to use. When we got started, our school board actually provided funding to help support our blended initiative, and the goal that the district presented, including using that funding to purchase adaptive content. So what we put a process in place to actually first of all, invite school teams to come in, and we had discussions about what type of content did we want. Were we interested in a core curriculum that teachers could use to support their teaching in the classroom, or were we more interested in supplemental digital tools that teachers could use to supplement what they were already doing in their classrooms? And most of the feedback from our schools was that they really weren't interested in a core curriculum to put students on to go through. They were more interested in actually adaptive content. So we made a focused effort to look for and track down those vendors who had adaptive tools, took them through a review process, kind of narrowed that selection pool down, and then invited school teams in to actually do demonstrations, ask questions. So we came up with maybe 4 or 5 content providers that the district provided to schools on a district-wide level. We look for something for each subject area, for instance, math, ELA, social studies, and science, in the core content areas, so that at least we were doing what we could to put the tools in the hands of teachers and take some of that guesswork out of it for them. So I don't know if that answered all of your question, but that's kind of the process we used in selecting the digital content tools for classrooms.
Thanks, Edie. Kevin, do you have some more thoughts?
Yeah. So for us, we actually wanted to focus on hardware, of course, and then we did initially when we started piloting. We started with some pre-set up like canned kind of curriculum stuff, with the intention that we'd eventually phase it out. Our teachers had expressed a very big interest in being able to make their own content, and so we wanted to give them supports in the initial years, and then we've been kind of phasing out some of the programs that we've been using. Part of the rationale for that is that the reality of using someone else's lesson is that they don't teach it the way I do. And so we wanted the teachers to have access or have the ability and feel the agency that they can actually control and direct the way the stuff is going to be going. So we do focus on teacher-generated content. We do focus on, as far as tools are concerned, more content creation instead of content consumption. So the choice between whether or not I use a program like an adaptive program versus whether or not I use a program where a student or a teacher can create work in digital space, but we'll generally invest more in content creation. As far as the data is concerned, the 2 things that I highly, highly recommend for any school is we wanted to, and we've been doing this for a number of years, we wanted to make sure that we had a very intentional data process. So we did leverage Paul Bambrick's Intuitos driven by data, and we have set up data teams in the school not only to model best practice, but for us to actually have common standards in which we're doing analysis, so that way we can target students and supports, but then also come up with more generalized supports that we can use across all contents. And in addition to that, a thing, and I think this was a realization that we had, is that we still felt like all of the learning, because we're talking about blended learning, but oftentimes the conversation is really around blended teaching, right? And so what we really wanted to focus on was how do we make sure that students actually feel like they understand why they're learning it and what they need to do next. So we started working with Bob Marzano's proficiency scales, and I think it's the text that they use is like a school leader's guide to standard-based instruction. We use that, and the proficiency scales allows us to break apart the standards that we felt were most important, but then it also allows us to then figure out what are the activities that we could typically have a student do. So it gives a student a clear picture of where they're at, and so it's kind of like a step-up rubric in our sense, where a student can actually, they get success faster because they can see where it's going. But in addition to that, it's allowed us to really target the activities that and the supports that we'd be able to offer students as they progress up a proficiency scale.
We have so many good questions. I think what we're going to do is we're going to take all these questions and put them in a Google Doc, and then I'll encourage my leaders to consider coming in and just answering them and putting in tidbits, and that would really help us as well. So I want you to know that we will find some kind of virtual or digital means to get answers to your questions. Maybe we could end, we really do have to finish up. So if I could go back and ask each of the presenters to kind of give us, motivate us and encourage us and give us maybe a 2 to 3 sentence pep talk on how to keep going and how to keep motivating our educators and parents and community in transition and in implementing blended learning. Just some kind of motivating speech. Does that sound good? And we'll start with Edie.
This is Edie. I'll start if you don't mind, because I'm going to jump off in just a minute. I have to run to a meeting. But I would just say that we've had multiple teachers who have been veteran teachers in the classroom for many years who have even said, I've been burned out, been doing the same thing for so long. but trying this new instructional model, blended learning, has really given them new life. It's really stretched them to do things differently, to think about lesson planning differently. So I think our challenge is finding those teachers who this has really set on fire again and having them share their stories throughout the district. You know, I think we all struggle with, you get bogged down in the day-to-day and doing the work. We forget to take care of those celebrations and those things that are really those great things happening in classrooms and the hard work that our teachers are doing. And we know how much, what a big job it is for them, and finding ways to celebrate their success, I think, is something we all need to do better at. So thanks for including me today. It has been awesome, but I'm going to have to jump off, okay?
Sounds good, Edie. Jeff, do you want to give us some?
Sure. I would say that, you know, following the lead of the Christensen Institute, I would say that, you know, within about 5 years, most classrooms across North America are going to be blended in some way, shape, or form. And so the sooner you dive into this wonderful well, the better for you and your staff. I think once you do, you find the student response is absolutely amazing if it's well constructed. And the parent response to it, because they have access and more involvement in the learning if it's set up properly, is equally powerful. And that just allows you to see firsthand, not necessarily through data. I think we're still early in the data thing with blended learning, but I think the evidence that supports through anecdotal conversations, through the assessment, through the student engagement in their learning, and the things that they produce it will rock your world, and you'll start to see and have just reinvigorate your passion for leading learning in your schools.
Thank you, Jeff. Michelle?
So I would echo Jeff on that keyword. To me is the engagement, and what I have been able to see happen with kids who you know, of all different ability levels, but in particular the kids who were doing fine but just weren't engaged in school, and the amazing things that they've been able to do because, you know, looking at blended learning as the vehicle for the personalization, to me, is the key. It has really allowed them to just thrive in this environment.
Thanks, Michelle. And Kevin?
So, you know, innovation happens usually because there's either something wrong with a system or because we're craving something better, right? And so one of the things that we have to keep in mind through all of this is all still pretty new, and so we still have the risks of failures of the frontier. And so we just got to know that, hey, you know, this is a process. Nobody's got it quite right. You just have to believe what you're doing is more right than what everybody else is doing, or more right than what was being done before. And so, you know, the solution is actually in your districts. The solution is in your schools. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, make sure through the entire process that you're engaging your stakeholders. You're using like a design process. You don't want to come up with a solution and then ask everybody to get on board. You want people engaged from the get-go.
Thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate all of you sharing your stories, because I think that's what makes a difference when we talk about being a frontier or being on that wagon ride. We have to share those stories in order to learn. I'm going to hand this over to Maya, but thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you, Farina, and thank you to all of our panelists. Super helpful, and loved hearing about the different contexts and tips and details about how you're leading the charge. So thanks a lot. As Farina mentioned, we'll be following up, and we'll be sending out both the recording as well as a link to a living document that hopefully our leaders can input. Just a quick shout out for our upcoming symposium that will be in Orlando from November 8th through 11th. Registration is open, so be sure to check that out. And then finally tomorrow, if you want to hear from teachers sharing the same perspective about blended learning implementation, we have a webinar tomorrow at 4 o'clock Mountain p.m. Eastern, and again, they'll be talking about how to support and sustain blended learning past September and throughout the year. So be sure to register for that if you're interested. Thanks again, everyone, and we will see you the next time online. Bye-bye.